All right, this is a question I get asked quite often. Because I talk about lead qualification so often, it naturally follows that a lot of contractors reach out on social media and ask me, when and how should a contractor refuse to provide a quote? It sounds harsh at first, and we don't have to handle it harshly by any means. In fact, I highly recommend that you don't, because you never know who those people are going to talk to or what they're going to do down the road, and you never burn a bridge. But this is a topic that makes a lot of contractors uncomfortable. A lot of us refuse to provide quotes as contractors. I hear this all the time. Nobody ever got back to me. Well, they didn't want the job, right? That's why. But it's very hard for us to say no to a customer. But when should you refuse to provide a quote? Now, before you lose your mind in the comment section, hear me out. I'm not saying to be arrogant, right? I have no time for this testosterone-driven arrogance and hubris that says, well, too bad, I'm too good for you, and right? I mean, we've all heard that. In fact, many of us have done that. I'm not saying you should turn people away or turn people off. I'm definitely saying, don't tell people to take a hike, okay? Don't do that. But what I am saying this, not every prospect deserves a quote. And that's controversial because most contractors have been taught that every lead is an opportunity. The reality is that some are, and some are distractions. And if you can't tell the difference, you'll spend your entire career chasing a lot of jobs that were never yours to begin with, and you were never going to win them. One of the questions I get all the time is, how do I say no without getting a bad review? So the truth is, if you've already driven to the house, spent an hour with them, measured everything, answered 27 questions, and then decide you don't want the job, you're probably asking the question too late. Okay, and that's what happens most of the time. The real secret isn't learning how to say no. The real secret is qualifying properly before you ever get to that point. Now, there are situations where I think contractors should be very cautious. For example, the prospect has made it clear they're collecting as many quotes as possible and plan to buy strictly on price. The prospect is already combative on the very first conversation. I always remember going to a renovation quote one time, and the guy did nothing but talk about how many times he'd sued previous contractors. I couldn't wait to get out of there. Most of my consult appointments were at least an hour. I was out of there in 15 minutes, and that was a courtesy. Okay, the scope keeps changing. You've had these before you even schedule the meeting. Expectations don't match reality. The champagne level project on the beer budget, okay, or the project simply isn't a good fit for what your company does. Those aren't necessarily bad people. They're just warning signs, okay? But here's what I've learned. The most expensive jobs are often the ones you actually win and shouldn't have. Not because they just lose you money, but oftentimes they do. But they consume your time, your energy, your staff, and most of all, your sanity. A bad customer at the beginning rarely becomes a good customer later. Now, does that mean you should refuse every difficult lead? Of course not. What it means is you need a process for deciding who is and who isn't a good fit for your company. And that's exactly why lead qualification matters. Most contractors think they need to learn how to reject people. I think that's the question. John, how do I nicely tell these people to get lost? Well, there's no way to nicely say get lost, okay? What they really need to learn is how to identify the right people sooner, and that's a completely different skill. And inside Contractor Authority, I actually teach a qualification framework that helps contractors identify buyers, shoppers, red flags, warning signs, and good fit customers before they waste hours running unnecessary estimates. Because the goal isn't learning how to say no. The goal is learning how to say yes to the right people. So I think by the time people have finished taking that training, this question essentially goes away. It really does. Anyway, that's it for now. I hope that answers that question. And until next time, I'm John the Contractor Guy.